Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Manga Writer and today, my autism has been fully activated, and I'm going to subject you all to another video about a show that I defended like my life was on the line, Thomas the Tank Engine, which in celebrating its 80-year anniversary just a few days ago, gave the fans something incredibly special. Mattel found, fixed up, and published the original lost pilot episode, Down the Mine. Down the Mine, the 26th episode of the first season from the 1984 show, was an episode that adapted the story of the same name. The story came from a collection of stories that came from Wilbur Awdry's Gordon the Big Engine, which was released in 1953, and it would be the story that would find itself going down in legend and myths across the fandom for many years. Down the Mine is an episode that has a very fascinating history behind it, and to really show how important it was to the creation of this series, I'm going to not just go into the history of this legendary pilot, but to make my video a little more interesting and a bit educational, I'm going to go all the way back to the show's very first conceptions throughout history. Because did you know that the 1984 series was not actually the first attempt people have made to adapt Thomas to the silver screen? For a long time, multiple people had tried and failed to make the original Railway books into a TV series. In 1950, the closest thing to televised Thomas stories was of a radio series called Listen with Mother, where they would occasionally read out some stories from the Railway books, narrated by Julia Lang. Thomas was actually quite popular on the radio, the series being told throughout the 50s and even in the 80s, where John Gielgud on the Noel Edmonds Show narrated 26 tales from the first 12 books on BBC Radio 1. Through the sound waves of the radio, the idea of visually adapting the stories would eventually be conjured up. In November 1952, Robert Mitchell, who had just heard about the Railway series on the radio, wrote a letter to the woman in charge of BBC Children's Television Department, Freda Lindstrom, asking if they could adapt Wilbur Awdry's stories for television. This original pitch kinda went into silence for a couple of months, but eventually this led on to her getting the rights to two of the stories in the series from editor of the Railway series Eric Marriott in February of 1953. And director Douglas Mair was hired to direct the project on the 1st of May in the same year. The first episode that they made was an adaptation of The Sad Story of Henry, the one that many people nowadays know for its controversial ending. Even though Henry got what he deserved, but I talk about that in another video, I will not repeat myself here. And to say that this first attempt at making Thomas televised resulted in an absolute shit show would be a serious understatement. Because the episode had to fit inside a 10-minute time slot, and the stories that Awdry wrote barely passed for 4.5 minutes in the Allcroft series, things had to be tweaked, to say the least. Not only that, but behind-the-scenes stuff was also on rocky ground. For the show, Mair decided on using real-life models that would be painted to look like the engines, so we got in contact with Meccano Limited, a company that made and produced the Hornby train sets, you know, the ones that look real and relied on electricity to power the engines. And were also extremely fucking expensive. To quote a letter that he wrote about his goals, "These stories are from 2 to 6 minutes long. It was my intention to use miniature reproduction trains driven by electricity on a circular track with pictorial backings, make the pictures fit the words, and join enough of the episodes together to make a 10-minute item. This method of presentation would do justice to the stories and give an item of the correct caliber for a Sunday program." Sounds like a good idea on paper, right? Get a company known for making high-quality train models, ask them for some trains, and then redesign them so that they would look great for the show. That sounds and probably would have been a great plan, until Mayer was given a few conditions about the tampering of the models, which were to not alter their shape and only put faces on the smoke boxes. Yeah, Meccano were, they were a hard bunch to deal with. Trying to work with these conditions, Mayer, I'm sure, tried his best, but after getting a look at the models himself, Audrey was not impressed. He thought that the models used for the episodes didn't look like the characters from his books, and despite the BBC trying to convince him that they were fine, and even with having little knowledge about Audrey, I have a slightly strong idea about how that conversation went, it took hiring a collaborator of Audrey's, PR Wickham, to fix and adapt the characters and even the Hornby set that they used as backgrounds to get the okay from Audrey, repainting the models for Henry and Gordon, and using some pieces of balsa wood to create shells that would go around James and Edward, much to the dismay of Meccano, who after finding this out, wanted someone to pay for, quote, ruining their models. The only surviving photo that there is online is of this black and white image of James, and I'm not even gonna be mean, that actually looks alright. On the 10th of June 1953, Marriott took the modified trains to Lime Grove Studios where the show was about to start filming, and the set wasn't ready. More of the behind-the-scenes chaos can be discovered in the same letter from Mayer that I showed earlier, where he said, and I quote, "On at least the first date, May 30th, this item will have to come from Studio A with a rehearsal time of 1 hour. This, coupled with the unsuitability of the camera for objects of the size of miniature railway stock, makes this treatment impossible. We will, therefore, have to use the pictures from the book, and hold each one in vision for about half a minute, unless the artist can do some more paintings. I am trying to contact him, but think it improbable that they can be done in the same style in the time. I am prepared to present these stories in this simple way, but you ought to know that I do not think it does justice to them, nor with the few pictures available will it produce an item really suitable for a Sunday program." So yeah, things weren't exactly looking great, but on the bright side, the producers showed him what kind of sounds would be played in the episode, so that was nice. With the set finally done and limited time left, the BBC started doing their first rehearsal of the episode. Yes, I said rehearsal, not recording, because this series, rather than being pre-recorded, would be broadcast live to the people of the world. So with it being live, they had to be on their A game, and if they want to make any kind of mistakes, it had to be in the rehearsals. Wickham made one big error during take 1 where he accidentally put the wrong type of back coupling on Henry's model, which caused some problems with him pulling stuff around. A small mistake that was easy enough to fix, and when take 2 came and went during the early hours of the 14th of June, meaning that they had at least a few hours left to fix any fuck-ups, everything seemed fine and everyone was confident that the broadcast would go on without a hitch. But what happened would be the complete opposite. On the 14th of June at 5 p.m. 1953, the episode's broadcast begun. The episode was 10 minutes as originally planned, and it was a full-on production. It had many interesting and complex shots, there was superimposed rain, there were people edited in to pull and push Henry out of the tunnel, there was a musical score to go along with the animation, and there was even narration that was done by Julia Lang. Listen to Mother's presenter. Though in some of my findings there was 1 or 2 sources that said it was actually an Irish actress named Noelle Middleton who did the narration, and when you try to compare and contrast, multiple sources say different things, so who exactly narrated this episode I'm not exactly sure, but either way, it was a woman who did it. All was going fine, and then disaster struck. Quote from Eric Marriott. "I settled down with my wife Dorothy and my 2 children, Jennifer and David, in front of our 12-inch pie television, expecting great things. Julia Lang began telling the story, a train came down the line and fell off the track. And then a huge hand came into shot, picked it up, and put it back on the rails. It derailed. Yes, the train, which was Henry, fucking derailed. And the cause of it, according to Mayer, was due to the same fault coupling that Wickham had problems with during the rehearsal. Audrey's sharp eye had seen this accident go down live and said that it was actually due to the person controlling Henry not working the points properly, which caused the model to fall off the track. It's also been stated that Julia Lang, who I must remind you was reading the story live on air, had to improvise on the spot to adapt what the screen was showing. What she said when she saw Henry crash, we will never know. But it doesn't stop me from theorizing. Once, an engine attached to a train was afraid of a few drops of rain. He fell off of the track, but God had his back, and soon he set off again. My God, what I would pay to have been a fly on the wall when all of this was going down. One of the most famous accounts that told the disaster of this broadcast was by a man named Robin Webb, who had been a volunteer for the Talon Railway at the time, and his account of the episode it's hysterical to read, with him saying, quote, Henry the Green Engine's derailment in the coronation year of 1953 is now enshrined with the stuff of Audrey legend. Fortunately, I saw the shocking Henry mishap as a young boy, and as young boys are wont to be, remember the derailment whilst the main accident-free program and similar screenings around that time have faded from my recollection. My memory of the program, which consists solely of the disaster, recalls that the derailment occurred when Henry was facing away from the camera while travelling towards the left of the screen on a slight right-hand curve. A man's hand then reached down from the top right of the screen as I faced it, with his thumb grasping the nearest side of the stricken Henry while the fingers clasped the far side. Henry was then placed back on the track in a rather fumbling rescue exercise. At the time, it was just one of the number of examples where disasters in a program made it all the more memorable. It is only with 70 years of hindsight that I recognize this incident to have been arguably the most famous of them all. But that wasn't the end of the disasters that would happen on screen, because during this broadcast, another disaster hit the studio when Edward's model just broke down. It broke down. It just refused to work, meaning that it couldn't be used. It's rumored that all of the modifications made to the original Hornby model had just banjaxed Edward's system, but either way, because it was live, there was nothing that they could do. So in a last-ditch effort to try and save face, the crew replaced him with James, in a scene that was meant for Edward. This, as you may not be surprised to hear, greatly pissed off Audrey. And Richard Dalby explains in his book, The Thomas the Tank Engine Man, that Audrey said that James, quote, was allowed to gatecrash a story about the other two locomotives, Edward and Henry. As a result, the adventures became merely playing at trains. This and a plethora of other mistakes left many people fucking furious. Die-hard fans were upset and angry by the absolute embarrassment of the adaptation, but it was the people behind the scenes that had the most scathing comments. First, there was the controller of programming for BBC Television, Cecil McGivern, who said very bluntly in a letter, "This was one of the most pathetic things I have seen on television. How did this go on with so many pathetic moments, please?" Jesus Christ. Fucking hell. Then there was Edward Ward, who wrote in a letter, "I was extremely disappointed and really alarmed by your presentation in the children's television program on Sunday, June 14th, of two stories taken from our book, The Three Railway Engines by the Reverend W. Audrey. There was an entire lack of coordination of the whole feature and the spirit of the stories was completely lost. The script which we had understood would be followed was mutilated, both in respect of the story itself and the sound and other effects. Apart from these faults, the operation of the switchgear left much to be desired. The stories in the family of engines are well known and loved by countless children and their parents, and we have received wide criticism of the TV production and narration. In view of this unfortunate episode, we regret that we cannot agree to the further broadcast of our stories arranged, unless you can satisfy us that you can reach a much higher standard of presentation." I always love reading angry letters from the 50s because this was just during a time where swearing wasn't really a thing, but you can just tell through the very artsy language that these people are pissed at what just happened. And then there was Wilbert Audrey himself. who you could probably imagine from his last few comments was not the happiest of lads, and pretty much told Mayer that if he didn't get his shit together, then the show would be cancelled entirely. Remnants of this threat can be found in an old Daily Mail article, which reads, quote, "The BBC has received an ultimatum from the Reverend Wilbert Awdry, 42-year-old vicar of Enith Nearfolk, and creator of the 3 Railway Engines series in children's TV. Mr. Awdry complains that the last time the adventures of the locomotives James, Edward and Henry were screened on June 14th, things went wrong. Operating a model railway is a skilled job, says Mr. Awdry. Unless he gets a guarantee that such mishaps as not switching points will be avoided, there will be no adventure next Sunday. Last time too, one engine broke down. Said the BBC last night, it was a technical hitch. We should have had a child in the studio to keep the electric trains running. Title of the adventure that went off the rails, The Sad Story of Henry." There's even some archived letters that you can find online that Awdry had written to various people during the aftermath of the broadcast, but coming completely clean, because these are all handwritten letters and because I was not raised in a time where this writing style was the norm, I could barely read what was said. But if anyone can actually read this and wants to tell me what they say, by all means, comment it down below. But even though I can't read what was said, one thing I know for sure is that from the way these letters were written, I just know that Awdry was fuming when he was writing them. BBC reached out to Awdry apologizing for the fuck-ups, with Mr. Rich, the man who organized children's programming for the BBC at the time, writing a letter to him explaining what had happened, and promised Awdry that it wasn't going to happen again should the program keep going. But it was too late, and Awdry would eventually get his wish. Even though it did relatively okay, as it received 61% in average ratings and even 66% in children's programming, the damage dealt to The Sad Story of Henry had already been done, and the plan to release the next episode that was meant to come out the following week didn't come to fruition. Lots of people wrote to Awdry sharing his frustrations, and these complaints, along with media coverage that was far from ideal, resulted in the second episode of the show being postponed and eventually scrapped. As for the models used on set, Marriott actually attempted to send them back to Meccano Limited, but the BBC ended up returning them to him, with Douglas Mayer writing back to him his letter saying, "I am returning to you the 4 engines that you loaned to us. Mr. K of Messera Meccano Limited came to see me today and is sending you an account for the original 4 locomotives, 4 of which he sent to you direct and 1 together with tender that you received from me. Enclosed in this letter is the body of the Fat Director, which you very kindly sent along." The motherfuckers sent back the Fat Controller figure, which he sent as a gift. Jesus Christ, that's brutal. I guess Meccano had caught wind of what had happened and decided that any kind of association with that production was just too embarrassing to bear. So, yeah, the broadcast was a complete disaster and loads of people weren't happy. But the funniest part of all of this to me was Douglas Mayer's sharing of his mistake. While he partially blames himself for what had happened, he also blamed basically everything and everyone else for the broadcast going wrong. And to show you just how much this man went full damage control, I'm just going to read you some of the letters he had sent. One of them reads, quote, "You asked me to let you have a note about this program. The main trouble was caused by a faulty coupling on one of the engines. During rehearsal, we had several other mechanical difficulties, which we had to overcome, and a completely successful run-through was carried out at 4:30 p.m. Both the train operator and I were satisfied that we had overcome all difficulties. However, on transmission, a defect developed in one of the couplings. If I had had another experienced operator, this could have been put right out of vision, but the man I was using to cover emergencies was not experienced. This, of course, was my fault, and I'm sure he did the best he could. He also inadvertently derailed a train out of vision, which caused complete chaos. Before putting up the suggestion for doing the program, I had carried out tests using Hornby's locomotives and equipment, but one of these had been modified considerably by the publishers of the book, and this modification proved unsatisfactory. Although the script contained what I thought were sufficient close-ups for each of the engines, on transmission, I was not able to use any of these except the telekind shots. Another letter that he wrote to Edward Ward on the 19th of June reads, and I quote, "Your letter of the 16th of June addressed to our copyright department has been sent on to me by Mr. Walford, together with his reply. I have already spoken to your Mr. Marriott and explained that due to the mechanical trouble this first broadcast went wrong and that we did not wish to do a second one. Some of the trouble were because 2 of the locomotives that Mr. Marriott had modified were made of balsa wood instead of the original metal in the Hornby models, with which the story was worked out. The front coupling on one of the engines was also the wrong type for self-couple, and although this was made to work satisfactorily at rehearsal, it gave way on transmission. May I say that I share your regret and disappointment over this unfortunate episode." Jesus Christ, Mayor, this man was not ready to go down without taking everyone else with him. As for the episode itself, fortunately for Mayor, it's been lost to time. Because it was a live broadcast and the videotape had not been invented yet, there is no video evidence of the episode out there. The only evidence of its existence is of this one picture of James, like I said before, and a couple of pages of script that documented the episode, which was shown to the public in July of 2023 by the Audrey Extravaganza 3, which revealed that the broadcast had actually combined both the sad story of Henry with the story Edward, Gordon, and Henry to make the broadcast reach 10 minutes, even sprinkling in events from Edward's day out because, it couldn't have been any worse without it. And with that, yeah. In short, the first attempt at adapting the famous children's stories was an utter failure. Edward Ward had even tried to give the series another shot, thinking that Audrey's story, 4 Little Engines, which was yet to come out, would be the perfect story to try. However, after Stanley Pickard wrote to Frida Lindstrom pitching the idea, he was given this response. Quote, "I am sorry to have delayed my reply to you concerning the Reverend Audrey's Little Engine stories. I was abroad at the time of your first letter and have still not caught up with all my correspondence. I am afraid that, at present, we cannot put on any program of this nature. Our former effort was, for various reasons, something of a tragedy, and until such time as it is possible either to make films of these charming stories using zero-gauge models, or by employing the very costly method of film animation, I cannot risk another try. In spite of the fact that we had advice from Meccano Limited, who sent their own technician to operate the models, everything went wrong, and Mr. Audrey was, I believe, angry and disappointed. As you know, the BBC is about to begin work in the Ailing Film Studios, and when this is in full operation, it may be possible to review his ideas again. And with the possibility of a second chance being burned to the ground, the 1953 failure would remain for many years as the only attempt made to popularize the Railway series. But it wouldn't be the last. A second attempt at adapting the series came around in the year of 1976, where director Andrew Lloyd Webber, a man who has a musical portfolio comprising of The Phantom of the Opera, Evita, The Wizard of Oz, and Cats, tried his own hand in adapting the books. When he was younger, Webber had read the original stories and grew a very deep respect and admiration for them, and approached Ward and Kay to pitch the idea of a musical-style animated TV series, done in the cutout style reminiscent of the show Ivor the Engine, which maybe one or two of you might have heard of, but to those who don't, this is what Ivor the Engine looked like. It's certainly no Disney animation or anything like that, but the idea was still solid. And the studio that was to animate the pilot episode was an English studio called Granada TV, a studio that had already had shows like Coronation Street under its belt during this time. There was lots of promise for this series, as not only was Webber gaining lots of popularity around this time with his musical work across stages and films, but his love and respect for the Railway series was shown on full display during his many meetings with Audrey and K&W's managing director, Stanley Pickard, where the show's style was drafted out and even some test lyrics were written up by a man named Peter Reeves, which went, "Come take a ride with the 8 famous engines, famous and faithful and driven by steam. Each one is run by the branch line controller, each part of his scheme, the Fat Controller's team."
Oh.
So unlike Douglas Mayer from 1953, everything seemed to be going very well for Webber. So what went wrong? Well, despite it all looking good, there was one glaring problem: the contracts. If Audrey agreed to the conditions given to greenlight the show, then every single book and ideas and concepts outside of the books, even future ones, would all belong to Weber and his team. If he was to go ahead, Audrey would basically be giving his entire life's work away to another person. Which, as you may have already guessed by what kind of man Audrey was during the course of his life, he, along with his publishers, were not too pleased about that idea. Even when Weber's lawyers implored Audrey that it was for the best, because they believed that them having the rights would help, quote, secure the investment money from America, which would be needed to pay for the animation and the filmmaking, and Picard even told Audrey that he would be, quote, maintaining personal contact with Andrew and still had a slight hope that there would be a way out, Audrey for a long time did not budge. His old British man came out in a particularly funny saying where he claimed that, quote, once the Americans get hold of it, the whole series would be vulgarized and ruined. Not only was the man stubborn, but his English pride was something that never wavered, refusing to trust an American. He was also totally fucking right, because HIT and Mattel took this precious series and hoo boy did they have a fun time burning it to the ground. All Engines Go having this amount of content is a fucking war crime. After almost a year of negotiating and back and forths between the two teams, an agreement was finally made, and Audrey was paid in advance £500, or £3,319.38 in today's money. With this, Andrew then spent £10,000, or £66,387.55 if you're to calculate inflation, on a pilot for the series, and after a couple of years, the pilot was completed in 1977, where it never saw the light of day. Due to personal projects, his newfound fame elsewhere, and his drive to release the series not being enough, Weber eventually decided that he would just abandon the project, as well as Granada TV deciding that they weren't going to make a whole series, because their belief was that the Railway books weren't popular enough outside of the UK to justify spending the budget needed to make it. Oh boy, I'm sure they're coping and seething now. But unlike Douglas Mayer, who came out of his failed pitch a bit bitter before him, Weber just took it on the chin and moved on with his life, viewing his attempts at bringing the books to life as a badge of honor. When I say that Weber loved the Railway series, I really mean it. His love for the world of Sodor never faltered in any way, where in the same year as his pitch went under, he formed the company Really Useful Group, which is directly inspired by the famous phrase really useful engine that was all over the books. In the year 1984, he wrote a stage play called Starlight Express, which is a musical done on roller skates about a young steam engine named Rusty racing in a championship against bigger and better engines to try and win the heart of a car named Pearl. Because 80s. As you can probably tell by the main character's name and the fact that the show was all about trains, yeah, the heavy inspiration that Weber took from Audrey's work is very easy to see with just a pair of eyes. And what is even sweeter is that this stage play would go on to become one of Weber's most popular projects, running over 7,000 times in London alone, making it the 9th longest running West End show in history. The show would even go on to win a Guinness World Record for most visitors to a musical in a single theatre, with the number as of January 2025 being 19 million people. It's just, like, man, George Carlin, Alec Baldwin, Ringo Starr, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Audrey and the people he managed to attract to his life because of his train stories is just, it's crazy to think about. There's even a cute little nod towards Weber contained in the official series, where the title of the 22nd series episodes, An Engine of Many Colors, references the title of the song, A Coat of Many Colors, which is a reference to one of Weber's musicals called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. My god, that is just adorable. Unfortunately, video evidence of this musical pilot, like the 1953 adaptation before it, does not exist. The only pieces of evidence that we have of this take on Thomas is old black and white photographs containing illustrations done by world-renowned animator and director Brian Cosgrave, who would go on to make programs like Naughty, Danger Mouse, and even the 1989 adaptation of Roald Dahl's The BFG. And I gotta say that judging by the pictures we have, I'm kinda disappointed that the show was never continued, because Brian's art style was shockingly similar to the book illustrations. We could have had some good stuff if Granada TV committed, but hey ho, hindsight is 2020. So with 2 attempts of his series failing to meet his standards, I could only imagine that Audrey was a little jaded and a bit resentful by the ways his works were done by other people. And for a few years, he would have peace, as no more attempts were made to adapt Thomas the Tank Engine for the silver screen. But, as the famous saying goes, 3rd time's a charm. And it would be this 3rd and final attempt that would not only succeed where others failed, but would turn Thomas into a worldwide phenomenon, gaining millions of fans all over the world. It was a cold and rainy day in the year of 1979. The late Britt Allcroft, who was actually making a short documentary about the British's reviving interest in railways around that time, bumped into Audrey at one of the Bluebell stations in Sussex. During the production of her documentary, Allcroft had discovered the books, and like many before her, quickly fell in love with them. To quote her from an interview in The Times, "I was making a film about the love affair between the British and trains when I came across the Railway series. The books were beautifully illustrated. There was something about the expression on the trains' faces that grabbed me." The rain was getting heavier by the minute, and to avoid catching a cold, the two found themselves chatting away inside a pub located in Tunbridge Wells. The two quickly became friends, and during one dinner together, Allcroft told Audrey about her desire to adapt his books, seeing the massive potential it had in entertaining children. Allcroft also had a very positive viewing towards the television, comparing a family watching a program together to be reminiscent of the old times where families would read stories instead. Audrey must have heard this and thought that he was going to have to deal with another headache, and initially refused, with Allcroft saying that he told her that, quote, "it couldn't be done." And I mean, when you had people like Andrew Lloyd Webber trying and failing to adapt your series, I can't say I blame the man. I'm sure at this point in his life, he was just incredibly cynical when it came to TV adaptations of his series. But like the people that came before her, Allcroft was persistent, and after what I'm sure was a series of very interesting chats and a few negotiations with Ward and Kay, Audrey eventually sold her the television rights to Thomas for £50,000, or £242,545.13 in today's money, in the year 1980. After getting the rights, Allcroft would have a very difficult uphill battle ahead of her, from financiers claiming that the show would be dead on arrival to others trying to take the rights away from her. Allcroft stuck to her guns as much as she could and was determined to get the series off the ground. She would spend 2 years watching test footage and meeting with all kinds of animators to try and pin down what kind of animation the series would use, with the styles ranging from stop motion, claymation, classical Disney animation, to even CGI. There's a foreshadowing joke somewhere in there, but I don't even want to imagine 80s CGI just seeing 90s Beast Wars. Overrated as fuck, by the way, fight me. It was after meeting the co-producer of the series, David Mitton, that the idea of live-action engines and action figure humans be considered, which made the series a lot cheaper and easier to produce than it would if it was animated. And there was a certain magic behind this kind of style, with Britt Allcroft's husband saying that they basically were playing with trains and filming it, which made the possibility of kids enjoying it that much greater. And yeah, he was totally fucking right. Around this time, Allcroft was trying to find a suitable narrator, and despite getting talents like Johnny Morris, Willie Rushton, and Sir John Gielgud, Allcroft rejected them all, Their voices, although good, was just not what she was looking for. It was when she listened to Beatles singer Ringo Starr on the television during an era of the Michael Parkinson show did she come to the conclusion that his voice would be perfect, and reached out to him to see if he was interested. Starr's involvement even sparked a little bit of controversy due to a journalist speculating on how people would react to Starr's distinct accent, but everyone on the crew, including the man Audrey himself, welcomed him aboard with no problems.
Wilbert Audrey, what do you make of him? Do you think he's done a good job?
Well, I think Ringo's done an excellent job.
Well, your words in my mouth, we could go anywhere.
To quote Ringo Starr himself from a Vulture interview, the show's producer came to me with the idea. She said, "We've got this book, Thomas and Friends, and we'd like you to narrate it. I've never done that stuff before, so I was confused when I was approached about it. I thought, well, I've never done narration. I don't feel like I'm going to be good at it. So I sat around for a week. We had a studio in the house at the time, and I just thought, alright, what the hell. I'm going to read 4 stories and send it to them, and if they like it, I'll do the gig." And they liked it. Along with his initial fee to do the gig, Starr also wanted to get 5% of the business profits, which, as we all know now, would be a very, very wise decision. Despite the original pilot having a low budget, it still had to be crowdfunded in order to be made, with Allcroft even having to mortgage her house and getting loans from her bank to be able to pay for the pilot's production. Everything she did was, to quote her, a huge financial risk. The pilot was produced on the C stage of Clearwater's Battersea studio, and the budget was so low that instead of using the periscope lens system that Clearwater could provide, the shot was instead filmed on a standard Rostam-based 35mm Mitchell camera. When the show was eventually greenlit by ITV, however, the crew would go on to commission the periscope and use that exclusively for filming the final series. After 3 weeks of production, or 15 business days between March and April of 1983, the short was finally complete, and it was used as more of a proof of concept to see if not only if the show would do well for its intended audience, but to help them understand, experiment, and refine the way that the show would be filmed for its first 26-episode run. The episode being shelved and redone entirely when the series was greenlit, the official episode being the finale of Season 1. For the longest time, the only people who had ever seen Down the Mine in its original form were the people who saw the initial first test screening, and a man named Rick Sigelkow, who showed the pilot to a preschool class along with his wife, both of whom seemed to really like what the show was going for. Sigelkow would also go on to produce the series Shining Time Station thanks to the show's success, which was a show with puppets and everything, and would play Thomas the Tank Engine episodes inside those episodes themselves, even having Ringo Starr play a tiny man called Mr. Conductor, someone that some of you might know from a very magical movie that was made in 2000.
Sparkle, sparkle, sparkle.
Fuck yes, sparkle, sparkle, sparkle! It was rumored among fans that Sigelkow had retained the ownership of this lost pilot, but it was later believed that Mattel had gotten the episode back due to Sigelkow giving them all of his master tapes of Shining Time Station along with Thomas the Tank Engine. And that's what it was like for fucking decades. Until 2025, this pilot was doused in mystery and rumors, with some fans being very keen on if the pilot would ever be released to the public, and some even believed that the pilot was just destroyed and lost to time. YouTuber Nick Starwind once had an email exchange with Ian McHugh, one of the producers of Thomas at the time, and McHugh confirmed to him that not only did the pilot indeed exist and was still around, but he had hopes that Mattel would do something with it in the year 2025.
So I decided to send an email to this address and ask if the article was legitimate and if I was talking to the real deal. And long story short, I was. In his reply, he confirmed that the interaction did happen and that his hopes will be that Mattel will plan something for 2025, but still couldn't confirm if it was true, as it was down to Mattel at the end of the day. So I thanked him for getting back to me, sprinkled the information I learned about the missing coach's location, and said my goodbyes. Because Honestly, from what he stated in his conversation in this article, he gets asked a lot about the missing media, so I feel re-asking the question was just going to annoy him, as the answer was pretty clear seeing as nothing new has come out.
In 2022, confirmation of this pilot's existence found its way onto the internet when someone leaked a lot of very interesting stuff, such as the original script used, concept art detailing how some of the locations were going to look, stills from the original version, and also some production documents regarding the pilot. In April 2024, Lost Media user Sewer Reviewer made a video that talked about a still image that was rumored to be from the original pilot, which he obtained from an anonymous source. All of these different leaks and rumors and myths festered the internet for a very long time, and it made fans very excited to see if this piece of Lost Thomas media would ever see the light of day. And in the year 2025, their prayers were answered. Thanks to Ian McHugh finding the original 40-year-old film cans inside Mattel's archive, which confirms that Sicko Cow didn't keep it all along, this episode was able to be digitally produced in 4K, have some music added specifically for this pilot composed by one of the original composers of the series, Mike O'Donnell, and was released to the public for all the world to see on the 9th of May, 2025, the day of the 80th anniversary. I was made aware of this news by a good friend of mine, and after seeing the original pilot with my very own eyes, I knew that I had to talk about it. And I am sorry to the fans that were mainly looking for me to talk about Down the Mine, because once I was doing the research, I was just thrown down a rabbit hole and I just had to share what I found. But we're here now. We are here. Down the Mine, let's talk about it. And I think the way to show off what they did and how it differed from the official release would be to do a side-by-side comparison, seeing what the official release changed and what they kept in. And I'm just going to give you all a little warning, I'm going to be really indulging in Thomas lingo and details that people outside of the fandom will not give a shit about, because this is just the thing with Thomas, he gives me such unbridled joy that my autism just goes fucking haywire. So sit back, relax, and prepare for some of the most concentrated tism you've ever seen from my channel. The first scene of the episode where Thomas teases Gordon about falling into a ditch in a previous story is pretty much one-to-one, albeit with some minor differences. The line explaining the fate of Gordon, for example, was a show-only addition, whereas it was taken out of the pilot to keep more in line with the original book, which made no such reference. One thing that the official stories did very good at was taking multiple stories across different collections and ordering them in a way so that the stories had a somewhat overarching narrative, taking the form of some mini-arcs that future seasons unfortunately wouldn't do as much. Down the Mine was after the release of Off the Rails, which showed what had happened to Gordon that sparked Thomas to make that comment about the funny smell. So Down the Mine had this sort of continuation vibe in the show. Plus, given that Thomas had multiple stories up to this point and there was a high chance that kids either might have forgotten what had happened or had watched the episodes out of order, I think it was a smart choice to add in that line into the official episode, as it was a very quick reminder of past events and very quick context that perfectly explains why Thomas decided to wake up and choose violence in this episode for presumably no reason. It just made the whole thing come together a lot nicer. And it also just makes me question why they even decided to use Down the Mine as the pilot, because no one who hadn't read the books would understand why Gordon would be angry at Thomas's teasing. And although I tried my absolute best to find out why Allcroft chose it, I could not find an official source. Google's new AI thing said that her reasons were, quote, because it was a strong, well-loved story for the Railway series, the source material for the show, and it demonstrated the kind of storytelling and visual style she envisioned for the series, but I'm not exactly willing to trust AI on this kind of stuff because I even refreshed the page and the bot gave me a very different answer, so do take the AI's reasoning with a massive pinch of salt. But hey, considering I couldn't find a better source, that's all I've got. Take it or leave it. Even so, despite my nitpicking, I do have to remind myself that this pilot was more of a proof of concept, rather than an official release. If anything, I'm sure that they were more focused on just pleasing Audrey than anything else. After Thomas sets off before Gordon could answer him with another roast of his own, proving that Thomas is a fucking pussy, the lines of Annie and Clarabelle telling Thomas off for his behavior was also taken out from the pilot, with the original just jumping to the lines of Thomas being amused with himself. This was something that I believe wasn't the best change to make, and I'm glad that the show added these lines back in to show off just how rude Thomas was being throughout the story. It makes the story have more weight to it, and makes Thomas's eventual comeuppance that much sweeter to see. As Thomas goes away to get trucks, the two stories are kept pretty much the same until we see the warning sign. In the official version, the sign reads, "Danger, engines must not pass this board," but in the pilot, the sign says, "Danger, engines must not pass this point." Look, when I said I was going to be tistic, I am going to be tistic. This kind of stuff is interesting to me, cope and seethe. But as Thomas enacts his plan to get past the board and succeeds, the pilot had something that the official episode didn't that I thought was really cool, where instead of suddenly falling down the hole in the official version, the pilot actually showed the ground giving way underneath the tracks, which I think was a really cool way to set up the danger that Thomas unknowingly put himself in. In the official version, ever since I was a kid, I always found Thomas's accident to be a bit too sudden. In the shot before the accident, there's no evidence of anything being wrong with the track, so when Thomas suddenly fell down a hole that seemed to have formed from Narnia, I thought I had missed a scene before the crash happened. Why they decided to do this in the end, I don't know, but hey, maybe that effect was difficult in the pilot, and I don't know, maybe the war flashbacks kicked in that made them not want to do it again. After getting caught by the Fat Controller, and behind the scenes footage showed that they managed to achieve this shadowy effect on Thomas by using a paper cutout of the controller attached to a rod off camera, something that looks so innocent and pure that it cured at least 5 years of depression inside of me, Gordon is sent to pull Thomas out, the official episode doing a better job at making the whole rescue feel more grand, whereas in the pilot Gordon just showed up and looked like he was just sitting around a corner somewhere. I don't know, maybe Gordon was just watching Thomas all day and then got very satisfied when he saw that the little shit got a mighty dose of karma. The scene of the two reconciling and making amends is where the biggest difference between the two versions shows up. In the official release, Gordon asks Thomas if they would form an alliance, and Thomas just agrees with it immediately. But in the pilot, taking lines directly from the book, Gordon asks Thomas the same question, but Thomas asks him what the word alliance means, with the kid getting flashbacks to when he was just following orders when trying to pronounce it. This is a thing that I didn't know about because I haven't read the original book in such a long time, but now that I know, I'm kinda disappointed that they didn't keep that in, because alongside the stories just being fun adventures about engines and their mischief, Audrey also used his works to teach kids some words that they might have never heard of before, and I don't know, I find that little thing to be something that was very cute in the pilot, because it shows that Thomas is a cheeky child at heart, being full of himself, but not knowing everything like he wants you to believe. Him learning a new word is something that I think adds a lot more to his character, makes his cheekiness feel a lot more innocent, but as the two get coupled up, the two engines set off for home, ending on the same line. And the pilot release gives us credits that show us some shots that we just saw, along with high quality scans of the original paintings that were in the original book, with the short, after showing the Mattel logo, ending with a commemoration to Britt Allcroft, which I think was a very sweet and lovely way to honor her legacy. And with that, that was the pilot version of Down the Mine. So, what are my thoughts? In my opinion, I found that the pilot, although being technically inferior to the official release, still has some stuff in it that I found very engaging and interesting. For one, the models that were used in the pilot are completely different from the show. Thomas, and especially Gordon, don't have the same look as they did in the series, with Gordon's pilot model looking a lot more like his book counterpart, as well as looking more cartoony. Instead of being brass models, Thomas and Gordon are made from plastic, and while they looked the part, and I still think they look really nice, according to behind the scenes work, their functionality was far from ideal. At times, the models had to be pulled along by fishing wire due to the engine's frames not working properly, and when it came to the smoke effects, the 12-volt cigarette lighter that was usually found in cars that was reutilized into the engine's smoke machine generated more heat than what the plastic could take. The crew had to use the smoke effects sparingly as to not damage and warp the models, but this care to not damage the models resulted in the smoke looking much feebler than it did in the official show. Because of the models not being tightly made, this also meant that the smoke had a tendency to come out of undesired areas, like from Thomas's eyes, which you can see from this shot in the pilot. Along with this, getting the eyes inside the engines to move also proved to be a bit of a challenge, as according to the crew, the electrical currents from the track sometimes made the eyes go haywire fire they snagged repeatedly inside the models, and during production they were modified many different times, which is why the eyes on the engines sometimes look different between shots. But despite these technical errors, I find that these silly little goofs and imperfections actually gives the pilot a lot of charm. There's something fascinating about seeing what kind of show a series was before it was greenlit. And this pilot, through all of its little technical hiccups, I think was a lovely window into the small problems and annoyances that they had to deal with during production. It's got that kind of same charm as an old clunky video game, where despite it not looking or playing the best, you can still feel the passion and the effort put in oozing out of the screen regardless. It's got that rough edge that only old concepts can produce. As for Ringo Starr's performance,
had to push the empty trucks into one siding and pull out full ones from another. Fire and smoke, said Thomas. I'm sunk. And he was. Down a mine, is he? Ho, 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 laughed Gordon. What a jokey chortle, puffing to the rescue. An alliance, Thomas. United we stand, together we fall, said Gordon grandly. Right you are, said Thomas. Come on, waved the fireman. The driver leaned out of the cab to see where they were going. I saw you, said the fat controller. Please get me out, I won't be naughty again. I'm in disgrace, Gordon went on pathetically. I feel very low. Now, said Thomas to himself, are you ready? Heave, called the fat controller. Hurrah, laughed Thomas, and he followed the trucks into the siding. Oh dear, he said, I am a silly engine. Why, so you are, Thomas. We're both in disgrace. Stupid old board, said Thomas. There's no danger, there's no danger. Look out, shouted his driver. Come back.
Stop, don't come back.
yeah, it was definitely better in the official version. Like, yeah, it's a lot better. I'm not going to rag too much on the voice acting because I'm sure that Starr wasn't given as good direction than in the original version, after all, proof of concept, blah blah blah. But because he had multiple episodes to refine his voice, by the time they got to Down the Mine, Starr's voice was pretty much perfected, whereas energy levels and range had much more variety and weight to it. By the end of season 1, he was fully in character, whereas in the pilot, Starr sounds extremely relaxed throughout the entire thing. He sounds like he's telling his children a bedtime story, but doesn't want to wake up his wife sleeping in the next room, resulting in his voice sounding far more monotone and samey throughout the short, especially in places where a bit more energy would have enhanced it, you know? And while there is some charm to that kind of acting because it gives us an insight to what the first takes might have sounded like before it was tweaked, it did show very clearly that there was work to be done for future installments, which Ringo accomplished and then some. Michelangelos is still better though. Sorry, not sorry. But aside from these little critiques and the small jokes I made, I loved this pilot. Not only was it a very fun watch all around, but getting to see the pilot that was doused in legend for so many years and getting to experience a past that has long since died out for this franchise since season 11, it was amazing to experience. Throughout the whole 5 minutes, I was engulfed in a sea of nostalgia, where my brain was able to pick up lines and deliveries that were from the episode I knew and loved, and getting to experience new lines that I never heard before made the Down the Mine pilot a very enjoyable watch. This was a fantastic little surprise, and I think it was such a brilliant way to celebrate 80 years of the Little Tank Engine's legacy. The pilot really showed just how much heart and soul Britt Allcroft and David Mitton put into this series, even from the start. And the fact that it turned out even half as good as it did was because it had nothing but the best and most hardworking people imaginable working on it. And who knows? Maybe we might see something like this in the future if the fans make their voices heard. I mean, with All Engines Go being done, you know, who's to say they won't try again? Lord knows, I'm sure loads of people would kill to see Thomas return to its roots, but maybe that's just me being a little bit too positive. And at the end of the day, it's all up in the air for now. But hey, I can remain optimistic. I can have some hope. And with that little hope for a better future for Thomas, for the conclusion of this video, I'm going to give you something that I think the Thomas fans in my audience might enjoy. In the description, there contains a Google Drive link, where if you click on it, you will be directed towards an edited version of Down the Mine, where I try and follow the book as close as I can, where I edited in some of the scenes from the pilot in different orders, along with taking things out that weren't in the original story. Think of this little video as the unofficial Down the Mine director's cut. The reason I'm not putting it in this video is solely due to the fact that I'm not aware of how anal Mattel are in regards to copyright, and from my many hard battles with anime in the past, I know for a fact that there might be a chance that this video would get completely nuked if I played the episode in full, and I enjoyed making this video. I don't want to render it 5 or 6 times, so just to avoid myself the headache, I'm just gonna play it safe. So with this link in the description, you now have access to the closest thing you might get to an almost one-to-one adaptation of the original book. And if that sounds like something you'd be interested in seeing, head down to the link and give it a watch. And if you want to share your thoughts about this cut, then feel free to post them in the comments down below. I'm very interested in what you guys have to say. But for now, my name is Manga Writer. Happy 80-year anniversary to my childhood show. Thank you to Ian McHugh and all the people in Mattel for the work they have done to give us this glorious gift. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you all so much for indulging in my autism. I really appreciate it. God damn it.